Welcome, everybody, to our presentation today. I'm Alexis Bunten. I'm the co-director of the Indigeneity Program at Bioneers. And we're here today to talk about the curriculum that we've developed for K through first grades, also applicable to second and third grade for Thanksgiving. And all of this grew out of an initiative that started in 2016 when I was at the Bioneers conference at a dinner and was talking with somebody about why Thanksgiving felt uninclusive for us as Native Americans. And that grew into creating a children's book for Thanksgiving called Kipunumuk, which we'll do a reading of here today along with the curriculum with my co-authors who are here, Danielle and Tony. And Danielle is our first author, and she's Wampanoag, and Tony is our second author. He's Chickasaw. He's also written a middle age grade book for children. And before I get started on the curriculum, I would really like to ask Danielle and Tony why, in their view, they thought it was important to write this book and reshape the narrative of Thanksgiving to be more inclusive for all kids in the U.S.
I'm Danielle Greendeer. I'm Mashpee Wampanoag. I am coming in today from Mashpee, Massachusetts at the Wampanoag Trading Post and Gallery. Kipunamuk was a labor of love working alongside of these two, but it was really important to me to be a part of this and create something from a Native perspective, of course, from a Wampanoag perspective, and have an all Native crew and illustrator to really give voice to the plants and the animals that were there that would, have have very valid recollections of and memory of what happened. So that was really fun from my perspective, playing around with that. That's a perspective that's often ignored in children's books. I spend a lot of time with corn, and so really giving life and voice to the three sisters was really important to me. And this is something that I feel like is just very digestible and easy to relate to for the age group, and to really start the conversation about heavy topics like colonization, like the National Day of Mourning. So it was just a thrill to bring this to life. So I'm really happy that we are discussing a curriculum guide for teachers and just to continue the spreading sort of the knowledge and the activities to go along with it. So thank you.
And so I'm Tony Perry. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. I am joining from England. And so for me, this is important because it not only challenges what people think that they know, it actually creates a new default narrative for Thanksgiving. And that's why we started this as a picture book, so that it becomes for the youngest readers the first exposure to Thanksgiving. We felt that it was important not only to challenge what many people have taken for granted. Like for me, growing up in school, I had sat in on an interview that Alexis had done with Chris Newell, who's also done some research and written about the Thanksgiving holiday and an extensive work in this, and realized how little I knew. And I had just published my book, Chula the Fox, around the time of that, and realized again how little I knew and the need as a parent to find a way of approaching Thanksgiving. And so if we can create a new default story, then it makes these points about challenging the myths of the current story, putting Native people and nature both in front and center. This does that. And this is where the curriculum work comes in so importantly as well. So all of it really fits together. And it's been truly an honor to be a part of this team and of this work.
Thanks, Danielle and Tony. So when we were writing this book over the course of a year or 2 years, we had a lot of discussions around how to make it feel inclusive, because the problem with Thanksgiving is that it's been written that the quote unquote Native Americans, not even tribally recognized half the time, most of the time, probably, helped the colonizers who were the pilgrims. And we really wanted to write this story in a way where it didn't feel like it was an us them thing, like it was racialized, because race is a social construction. And that's why we wrote it for the perspective of corn. So I'm going to do a reading of the story, and then I'll walk you all through the curriculum that we've developed for kindergarten and first grade that's been walked through and approved, I guess, native approved, I would say. So if that's all right, I'm going to start with the story, and then I'll walk you through all the curriculum and activities for the book. So this is Kipunamuk, illustrated by Gary Meaches Sr., who's not here. There is front matter. The front matter talks about important words to know in the Wampanoag language, because we want to socialize all children to understanding native words. And it starts, I'll try my best here. I love your garden this time of year, said Maple. Me too. What shall we pick for lunch? Nokomis asked. How about crab apples? Maple suggested. No, choke cherries, Quill shouted. Those are both good medicine, Nokomis said. How about some Weeâchumun as well? So Weeâchumun is the name in Wampanoag for corn. Yes, Maple replied. She is such a good big sister to beans and squash. The three sisters, they grow together, Quill added. You're right. They feed people all over Turtle Island, Nokomis said, and they have many stories to tell. Can you tell us a story? Quill asked. How about the time Weeâchumun asked our Wampanoag ancestors to help the pilgrims? Nokomis replied. The first Thanksgiving? Maple asked, sorry. Some people call it that, Nokomis said. We call it Kipunamuk, the time of harvest. Here's what really happened. And the inside story to this is that Nokomis is Danielle's mom and Maple and Quill are her kids. It's based on real life children that you can see in this illustration. So it's a story within a story. One frosty fall morning, a long time ago, a large boat with white sails approached the shore. Seagulls circled above the boat, squawking. New people are coming! New people are coming! Hearing the news, Weeâchumun stretched her weary ears towards the sky. Who are the new people? She asked. Two winters had passed since many of the first peoples who cared for Weeâchumun passed on to the spirit world. So I'm going to pause there and give you all some backstory, which is that the Wampanoag peoples had experienced a pandemic like COVID, maybe worse than COVID, because so many people had died in those years getting diseases from the traders from the East Coast prior to the pilgrims even arriving. So this is kind of a nod to it in the story, but not particularly flagging it for the age group so that they can come back to it later. Those who were not taken by sickness found new homes to ease their heavy hearts and rebuild their lives. Weeâchumun feared this winter would be her last and called upon Fox for help. Fox looked up at Weeâchumun. Should we trust these newcomers? He asked. Stay close and watch what they do, Weeâchumun said. Fall turned to winter. Weeâchumun and the other plants fell asleep. Fox watched the newcomers come ashore. He watched as they made their way into the forest. He watched them enter an abandoned Weeâchumun. And so in the front matter, a Weetu is the word for a Wampanoag home. He watched them take a cooking pot and a basket of Weeâchumun seeds. And so this is based on historical reality. Don't take us away, the seeds cried. We're waiting for the first peoples to come back in the spring to prepare our beds. We must grow first. But the newcomers could not hear the seeds. Their ears did not know the voices of the land. And this is what Danielle, as our first author, brought to this story. She's the one who said we need to hear the story from the voices of the land. Weeâchumun. Fox watched the newcomers build homes on top of an empty village. He watched as they searched for food, but they could never find enough to eat. Many of the newcomers lost mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters during the long, cold winter. The first peoples watched as well. News traveled fast among nearby tribes that newcomers had arrived. Nobody was sure what to make of them. For many years, others had traveled across the sea to hunt, fish, and trade. Some were friendly and some were not. These new people seemed different. They were here to stay. Winter turned into spring. The sun warmed the earth. The newcomers continued their search for food. Weeâchumun awoke from her long slumber and thanked the Creator for another season. She and her sisters, Beans and Squash, pushed through the ground and reached towards the sky. Fox returned to share what he had seen. The newcomers are hungry, Fox told the three sisters. They took Weeâchumun's seeds, but they don't know how to help them grow. Other animals came to hear what Fox had to say. Sorry, it's hard to read a book into the internet. We should help, Weeâchumun said. I agree, Bean said. Our home is their home now. I think we should too, said Squash. People help us grow. We must help, Deer said. We agreed to feed the people. In return, they care for the home we share. I wouldn't, said Fox. The newcomers don't know our world. Sometimes new people can seem scary, Rabbit said. The Creator tells us to help all living things. This is how the world works. Yes, Duck and Turkey agreed. It's settled, Weeâchumun said. We will send the first peoples to help the newcomers. Summer turned into fall. Weeâchumun brimmed with food. So did Beans and Squash. Weeâchumun smiled as the newcomers thanked Tisquantum and the first peoples for their help. Kipunamuk, the time of harvest, had come. The newcomers prepared a feast to celebrate their first year in their new home. They fired muskets in celebration. Boom, boom, boom. Weeâchumun warriors and other first peoples arrived. They feasted for 3 days. That meal changed both our lives and theirs forever. Many Americans call it a day of Thanksgiving. Many of our people call it a day of mourning. Because remember, the story within the story is told from the perspective of Nokomis, the grandmother. So we're coming back to the present time. That's different from what we learned in school, said Maple. It was Weeâchumun and the other beings of the land, sea, and sky who made the newcomers' first harvest possible? That's right, Nokomis said. This is why we pray before we eat. Well, what did the newcomers and our ancestors eat, Nokomis? Quill asked. Many things. Succotash, duck, turkey, rabbit, deer, lobster, fish, pumpkins, cranberries, boiled bread, and nassamp, Nokomis said. All this talk about food is making me hungry, Maple said. Let's go make us some lunch. Then, Nokomis laughed, and we'll enjoy every bite, said Quill. that's the end of the story. There's some back matter though. We talk about who the Wampanoag tribes are with a map, the storytelling tradition, the harvest feasts, and how to give thanks, suggesting that people can maybe put out a spirit plate for their ancestors. There's a recipe involved. And oh yeah, and meet Maple and Quill, who aren't with you right now, but maybe later in this call they'll show up.
Yes, they'll be here in a little bit. I'm going to pick them up from school right now.
So at this point, I'm going to walk you through the curriculum, the Thanksgiving curriculum that goes along with this book. And I needed to read the book because the first activities are related to reading the book. We're going to put this curriculum up on our webpage next week, but we have the lesson plan broken up. Previously, the curriculum we've made has been week-long units, but we broke this up into subunits that teachers and or parents at home can pick and choose from, basically. The first one is introducing Kipunamuk, and we've aligned it to Massachusetts state standards because that's where quote unquote Thanksgiving started. And we asked the teachers to read Kipunamuk. You can check, if you're a teacher, look at the standards. They're aligned to ELA standards and history and science standards. And so read the book, and then we have a number of question prompts to ask the kids for kindergarten that align with those standards. And then secondarily, we asked the kids to look at what, I don't know how closely you were paying attention when I was reading, but we asked the kids to identify what Fox is doing throughout the pages, because Fox is our trickster. And really think about what's going on in Fox's mind. It's kind of a cognition activity. And then we asked the students to draw a picture inspired by the story and explain what they saw. And then this is kind of an optional one as well, but it is aligned with the standards in Massachusetts as well as California and many other states, for teachers to explain that reading the cover or title page is a way to learn who created the book, name the author and illustrator. So that's one activity. The next activity is called the Three Sisters, and it aligns with arts curriculum framework standards for Massachusetts, as well as ELA and life science standards, which is basically their science standards. So this is an activity where you need some materials to make them, but I tried to make sure that the materials were something that was easy to access. And so the kids are asked to make corn, beans, and squash. And for the corn, you just make it with a toilet paper roll. If you want to get fancy, you can glue corn kernels to it or googly eyes to it like we did. And then for the beans, you cut out a template, glue it together, and glue some pom-poms to it. If you want, you can add pipe cleaners to make bean stalks. So I actually did that with my kid at home. And here's the corn, and she actually had the bean stalks wind up around the corn here. And she put little leaves on them. And the squash was just a paper bag activity where you take a paper bag, paint it if it's not orange, fill it, add some leaves. Here's one of the ones that we made. Here's the other one where I went ahead and painted the stem to it. And the idea behind that is for children to think about the three sisters in alignment with the story as beings that have voices for themselves, and that it's three-dimensional so that they can play with it themselves. Then we have a picture of the three sisters in this activity. It's at the end. Here are the templates. Here's the three sisters drawn by our artist, Gary. And we asked the kids for their science to identify different parts of the plant, like where's corn's tassel, corn's leaf, corn's husk, the roots, beans, so on. And then for number 3 of this curriculum, we've pre-written something for a teacher to read. that's at the kindergarten level that teaches them how the three sisters, corns, beans, and squash, work together to support each other ecologically. And then there's a handout for them to follow. Scroll up to that handout. I know I'm going quick because I do want time for Q&A. So the handout is just to prompt the kids with these questions. Draw the three sisters. Which sister is the tallest? So that would augment them understanding how these plants work together in the environment. It's corn. Which sister keeps corn stalks stable with her vines? That's beans. Which sister keeps the ground cool and moist? That's squash. And then they're supposed to draw a picture of their own. And then, of course, since they've already in person made the three sisters, we want the kids to play with them and really interact with them. So we encourage teachers to play with them and then have some more questions. What did the kids do in their game? And then we discuss the following questions with the class. You can look at it on your own once we get it on the website. For example, the first question, does anyone remember from the book what time of year it was? When does Quantum help the newcomers to plant three sisters? The kids should know that we plant those seeds in the spring. How do you know when it's the right time to plant? After the ground has thawed. Have any of you ever grown a garden? That will only apply to some of the students. Do any of you remember what does Quantum put in the soil to make it healthy for the three sisters to grow? With the answer hopefully being fish fertilizer, because that's in the story. And a number of other questions. So that's that activity. And then the final activity for kindergarten that aligns with the standards is, what is the day of harvest? So we have some preamble language talking about why Thanksgiving is special for many Americans. What is special about harvest festivals? The fact that we grow local food that's grown and harvested, that we come together. And then we have a number of examples with websites that teachers can go to for extra research to talk about how similar festivals happen all over the world. And the idea behind this is that kids, no matter what their background is, maybe they can relate to some of this and feel like they're a part of this in their own ancestry. So that's the kindergarten curriculum. Oops. And then the first grade curriculum follows that and builds upon it. So for first grade, the three sisters activity that I just showed you with physically making beans, corns, and squash, it still holds. The standards are pretty much the same. The introductory activity where you read the book and ask some questions as a teacher, they're fairly similar, only the questions are a little bit more sophisticated for first graders, but essentially it's the same activity. But then there's a new activity called the Animals of Kipunamuk that fits the arts framework standards and the life science standards for first grade. And this one is really fun because the life science standards, they really want children to understand how different parts of their body work, I guess is the best way to put it. And so the idea is to ask teachers to reread the story and then ask in the story from the native perspective, what is each animal's perspective like? What's their personality like? And then we ask the teacher to talk about how different animals use their body parts and senses in different ways to grasp, see, hear, connect with other objects. And so the activity really asks, we have a template with the activity. Here's the template made by our artist, Gary, to cut out pictures of the animals and to glue them to popsicle sticks as puppets, really. And so I piloted that with my kid. Let me see if I can find them. Oh, they're behind me. And all the activities have been kid approved. She loved it. She colored them in. Here's turkey. Here's rabbit. Here's the deer. And we actually had a very robust conversation around the different animals' personalities. Here's fox. And she thought, based on the book, that deer was very generous because it was sacrificing its body for humans to eat it. But we turned that into a conversation around the circle of life on planet Earth. And so, anyways, the activity asks you to make these little puppets with these cutouts on popsicle sticks, and then encourage the students to play with them and make up a play, but after the discussion with the class, to really have the animals behave as if they would naturalistically. We did that. It worked out really well. And then as an accessory, as a teacher, you can ask the students to make a set, or you can help them to make a set, like if you have like a piece of silk for the ground or something. But when I asked my kid to do it, she actually taped 4 pieces of paper together and literally made a huge set. And I'm not telling it very well. She literally made a huge set, and we came up with a whole game. We played with this for 2 or 3 days. And she was so sophisticated. I don't know if I can show you it that well with one hand here, but it's like, it comes up. There's like a little space where they come up through the set and they interact. We had a whole storyline that went through that. And then if you want to, if you're a teacher, you can ask them to volunteer to play that out through the class and explain how the animals are acting, how they act. And there's a couple other activities we have that are not particularly grade specific. One of them is making corn husk dolls. And we did that actually during COVID. And we have full instructions to make a corn husk doll for a quote unquote girl corn husk doll or a boy corn husk doll, step by step with pictures that can be done at any grade. Any of these activities can actually be done outside the classroom. And then this is in the back of the book, which is making a Wampanoag recipe, nasamp, made from cornmeal, nuts, berries, and fresh maple syrup. Danielle made it with her kids and sent it the picture. And actually, I should also say, Tony made the corn husk dolls with his kids. I've done it almost every time we're at a barbecue now. My kid makes corn husk dolls because she's so good at it. But the idea is to really work with the plants of the harvest feast in a way where they can connect to them. So I'm going to stop sharing now and open up for questions. I know I went through the curriculum pretty quick, but we'd really love this curriculum to be what kids see at Thanksgiving instead of the headdresses and the other nonsense that we grew up with.
Aaron Hogan is just asking, do you have any suggestions for 3rd grade? And maybe along with that, Alexis, one of the questions that was asked earlier is how applicable this curriculum could be for students of all younger ages, not just, K through 1st grade necessarily, but up to 3rd grade. Could it apply beyond 3rd grade? And any suggestions for 3rd graders?
I'll start and then I'll pass it on to Tony and Danielle. But Aaron, my child is in 3rd grade right now, and she's the one who piloted all the activities with me. And as far as the activities go, I think it still applies if you're a stay-at-home mom or a mom, not a working mom, you can do it at home in your own time. If you're a teacher, you would have to check it against your state standards, obviously. But my third grader really loved doing all this, and especially with creating the three sisters, both as puppets and both as 3D animation, not animation, as 3D characters, we played for hours with it. So I know it works for third grade that way. And I don't know if that's a sufficient answer, but I'm going to pass it on to Tony here. And I know Danielle is picking up Maple and Quill right now.
Yes, I am a parent of two children. So in the UK system, my son is in year 5 and daughter is in year 3. So roughly around the same time. And they have enjoyed the exercises as well, especially around the Cornhusk dolls. For us as Native people, it kind of connects them to their culture. So they certainly enjoy that. And reading the story as well. I think that when you start getting into the older years, it becomes where the children start reading the text themselves rather than having it read to them. I think there's also an opportunity to start exploring some of the deeper issues that are behind it. So when you get in towards third grade, then there will be more understanding of starting to have conversations around American history. And so starting to think about, well, really, who was there first and what was happening here. So you start at least introducing issues around colonization and what that meant at a high level. So at least it starts to introduce some of these concepts. So I would say that it is applicable, the book in particular, but then when you start getting into some of the wider questions around the harvest and the role of animals and plants in nature around us, that's something that will go throughout the school curriculum, right? So around getting greater awareness of how we are part of a bigger puzzle, if you will. We all have a role to play, as Alexis pointed out, and starting to raise questions around the environment and sustainability. So I think it actually carries on beyond this. It's just that as you get into higher grades, then it's starting to have where the children are taking more of a leading role in the activity, and some of the questions start getting deeper as well.
Tony, I just jumped away while you were talking because really the Kipunamuk is really an introductory text to make everybody feel included and understand the story from a new perspective. But the follow-up is really Chris Newell's If You Lived During the Plymouth Thanksgiving by Scholastic. And that's really aimed
Absolutely.
probably fourth graders, but third graders could get into it too. And I read it to my third grader about 6 months ago, and she really understood it. And it's a little bit different than our book because ours is really from a Native perspective, and he had to really write it from kind of like a all perspectives kind of journalistic way. But this book is excellent, and it's really, really good for older children. And I'm sure Chris and Scholastic will be coming out with some other supports around that for children 3rd, 4th grade and older around Thanksgiving.
And just another point following that, I would add is that when you're getting for older children, they've already been exposed to the, I guess, traditional Thanksgiving story, right? So a lot of the curriculum then is about trying to take a step, trying to untangle myths that people have just taken for granted. And where Kipunamuk fits, I think, is that it creates, as I said earlier, it creates a new narrative, a new story. So when you start going back into the older year groups or older grades, then it starts to look about, well, where did Thanksgiving come from, right? So it came from the height of the Civil War after fervent campaigning for a national day of thanks. And then the myth that we know of Thanksgiving started taking shape really about 200 years after this event actually happened. So you can start getting into questions of the relevance of that today in a more diverse America, and actually even around the world, really, as we start looking at the problems of colonialism and the fact that we are a more diverse place and we all have a voice. And so this, comes into saying, why is that story the story? Why can't we have a new story? So it's something that is, for young children, maybe their parents or teachers reading it to them as an introduction to Thanksgiving, older ones reading it themselves, but the idea of it spreads beyond that. So I think that this and Chris Newell's book, all of this fits really well together about untangling what is there now, but creating an alternative. That's a step forward, I think.
So Theo, I can see the questions here myself, and
Sure.
I also can see that nobody can hear me. So I'm trying to get closer so people can hear me better. We have a question about where the books are available for purchase and how to get a copy. They're available anywhere books are sold, any of your major booksellers. We would like you to go directly to the publisher, which is Charles Bridge Press. But if you can remember Kipunamuk, you can Google it and find it on Amazon. But we'd rather it go straight through the publisher. And thank you for asking that. And then we have a question about any suggestions on how to request this to be taught at my child's school. So I was really happy. My kid had a play last week, and when she was in kindergarten 3 years ago, just before COVID hit, I requested that we do a land acknowledgement, and I thought it would be the first grade school land acknowledgement in the state of California. And apparently they ran with that, and they made a beautiful land acknowledgement in the form of a song, which I really, really liked. And when this book came out, I just went to her kindergarten and first grade teachers and the principal, just like I had done with the land acknowledgement. And I said, I wrote this book, I shared it with them. And I said, can we socialize the lesson plans around this book for Thanksgiving so that our kids don't grow up with stereotypes about us natives? And they said yes. So I think it's just almost simply a matter of asking, and I recognize that I live on the West Coast and it's a different political space than other parts in the country, but I don't really categorize people that way. I think everybody wants to know the truth and be a part of it, coast to coast and in the middle of the country. So I think it's just a matter of asking and providing the curriculum and making sure that the curriculum can fit your state's standards. And before I go further with that, I see Danielle and Tony nodding. So I want to ask if you two want to respond to that question as well.
Danielle?
So I think that this is a really great start for what we have right now. And as you were reading this, I've thought about this before, but for the older grades, this would make a really good play. I think that should be in the works coming up for maybe 5th and 6th graders. But yeah, I just think that this does a good job with at least introducing the three sisters and starting the conversation about Thanksgiving and colonization. And then it also offers families to create a new ritual around their meal. So the recipe is really important. And so, it's a very easy way to sort of indigenize your Thanksgiving and honor Native Americans in your own home. So, and I'm back, but I'll just debut them really quickly. But Maple and Quill, they're here. We're at the Wampanoag Trading Post and Gallery. Hi, Quilly. So they just got back from school. I miss them. So it's after school snack time. So I'm gonna put myself back on mute.
And I will just add that, as I said, I grew up in Oklahoma, which has a slightly different political culture, I think, than California does. And there's interest there as well. I am going to present a support presentation with my Native American tribe, the Chickasaw Nation, and others next week, and they're keen to try to they're working very closely with schools within their reservation boundaries, and teachers in those schools have been regularly asking my nation and others neighboring it, where do we find resources, right? How do we actually teach some of these? Because most people in the schools are non-native. They want to do it, but they want to find a way of doing it in an acceptable way. They don't want to get it wrong. And so there's been a lot of interest around these curricular resources and how to do it. So we're going to be sharing that with them as well. So I think across the country there is a wide level of interest, and I don't really think it's particularly a political thing, at least in the day to day, because it's going back into what happened in history, what happens in biology, and it creates a more inclusive story to it. So I don't think that there's anything particularly contentious in it, but it does make people think.
So we only have 9 minutes left, and we have a really great question here from Leilani. And she asks if we have any guidance on answering kids' questions about the statement. Many of our people call it a day of mourning. And I know as authors, we were very particular in putting that point in because we wanted children to be introduced to the idea that Thanksgiving and all that it represents symbolically in this country for us natives is the harbinging of colonization on the East Coast, even though we had it on the West Coast and it's very raced. But for me, that's a very difficult question to answer because, and I don't know about you, Danielle and Tony, but for me, I feel like I was always raised with those hard truths since I was very, very young. And I feel like maybe it's an assumption of mine, but maybe children of people of different backgrounds are sheltered from stuff that we're taught our whole lives. And it's a great question. How do we
Did really
how do we
well.
help parents and teachers talk about the statement, it's a day of mourning?
I will add something that we were going back and forth with during the editorial process and working with the publisher, and there's a line that's drawn, I think, on the one hand, how do we avoid, on one hand, you don't want to completely go over it and no one recognize, actually, wait, there's real pain that comes out of this Thanksgiving story, right? That just perpetuates what we have today. And on the other hand, trying to get into the issues of, frankly, genocide and colonization. So where do you find the line, especially for such young readers? That was something that we really wrestled with, and probably the most challenging part for us as authors, I think, through the process. I will say that growing up in Oklahoma, we didn't get into all of this as a child, so it was something that was new for me. And as I said, when I listened to an interview that Alexis was doing with Chris Newell, actually, around the decolonizing Thanksgiving, that I realized how little I knew. And that's what kind of sparked things to where we are now, I think. So it is an important conversation, and it's hard, but it is a hard answer, right? We need to show that things were hard and that there's a price that's still being paid. But where do you draw the line probably depends on, as students grow older, I think. But I'm going to defer to Danielle on that.
Well, I think it's important to know that that we answered that question in the back matter. So there is a portion in the back matter that explains the National Day of Mourning and why some individuals and tribes don't celebrate Thanksgiving as a national holiday. Just an easy, quick answer is that, since Since the arrival of the newcomers, many Native American tribes have not been treated equally or fairly and are still fighting to this day for basic rights and necessities like water. And when Thanksgiving comes around, historically, the national holiday has portrayed that natives and the pilgrims were friendly, and that, thank you so much for the Indians, and you're so great, and let's mock you with costumes and, sports names, when that just glosses over the reality of real live living Native people. And so that's why Native people do not celebrate Thanksgiving, because it's as a national holiday, it's fake. It's a total false and a mockery of real Native existence. But a time of harvest, which is the word for Kipunamuk, is something that tribes do celebrate. There are many times of harvest. So it's not about not gathering around food. It's not about not giving thanks for our food or even eating with friends and family. It's about not supporting this fabricated national American holiday.
And just to expand on that too, that it goes.
To cut you off here because we have 4 minutes and we have one really good question that I want to get to. Thank you so much, Danielle and Tony, for your brilliant responses. So we have one more question that I just don't want to shortchange it with the few minutes we have left. And the question is, can we anticipate blowback in some states about this expanded view from those who've created banned books lists in the confused critical race theory debates? Will Bioneers have supports for those of us trying to introduce that in our state? Well, I can speak to Bioneers, but what do you two think about blowback? Because I'm in the West Coast, I'm in California, so it's a little bit different here.
Oklahoma's at the heart of that, I think. So they've passed legislation that has tried to restrict what books are shared. And I have to say, it's, for me, and in a way, it's kind of watching the space, because we're going to be putting ourselves straight into it into the coming weeks and months. But what I would say to that is that this is coming again. This is looking at history. It's based in history. It's based in fact. It's based in science, and that's what it's coming to. It's not really that controversial. There's nothing in here that should be a controversial thing to it. All we're saying is look at the world around us, and think also about what actually happened that first year. And that's so I think that this is something where people, in whatever levels of dose you want to give or need to give, you're able to. And I think it comes back to that point about the day of mourning. You may have to be a bit more subtle about it in some states than others, but you can still broach the concept. So even if you're spoon feeding versus being able to allow people to eat the full strength, you're still getting it there, and they're getting the wider concepts.
I don't think there's going to be any pushback. Just for the record, Kipunamuk recently won the Best Children's Book for 2022 in New England from the Independent Booksellers Association. So that's really a big deal. And that shows us that, at least here on the East Coast and in New England, Kipunamuk is definitely well received. On a national front, I think that from tribal nations, there's a breath of relief that we have put this out there and we're representing Native voices. And from a non-Native perspective, on the national front, the entire narrative around Thanksgiving is shifting already. So the last few years with the Macy's Day Parade, the Wampanoag Nation and singers and dancers has been a part of that. They've spoken in Wampanoag. They've performed at the beginning of the parade. There's been Native acknowledgements. So I think that people want a more authentic voice. I really can't imagine there being pushback.
Well, and we did write the book very considerately. We're all parents. The three of us are parents of young children, and we want them to understand things fully. And maybe, like Tony said, maybe he wasn't exposed to that stuff as a kid. I was fully exposed to it all the way. And I think I want to end this with just a little bit of a reading of this last comment we have in the Q&A here, which is very beautiful. Thank you for sharing it. It says, we've never shied away from the sorrow and rage and grief of the world when we share the world with kids, but we also allow space and time enough for feeling the pain and then talking about how we can help change the world for the better for everyone. Kids want to help and be empowered in real ways to make the world a more beautiful place. So your book and curricula will help just do that. And I want to thank you for sharing that comment and for being a part of us today. And for future people who see this webinar, we will have this curriculum up on our website probably in about a week or two, and we hope to see it shared with teachers across the country to replace the narrative that's currently being taught. Theo, do you want to add anything to close us out?
No, thank you everyone for attending. This is a really beautiful event. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Danielle. Really, really beautiful. Congratulations on this book. This is very exciting.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.